Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Alien Earth. Episode 5 is now here, and you do Maginot want to miss it. Sorry, Maginot. I must stress, it's Maginot. Throughout this video, we'll be breaking down the episode and going through all the Easter eggs within it. I finally get the name right, and it finally explains the story of the ship. Also made me realise #Morrow was right. Throughout there's betrayal, backstabbing, literally, and death, along with us learning lots about the creatures. If you enjoyed, please hit the thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe for our breakdowns on the episode right after they air. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Alien Earth.
My orders are from Yutani herself. Nothing matters but the cargo.
Now, the introduction of episode 1 closed out with Morrow drifting off to sleep. Intercut with this were flashes of moments that we pointed out during our episode 1 breakdown. These are what play out in the entry, with us seeing that happening in full force. This also explains why the ship ended up on a crash course to Prodigy City, and it turns out there was some industrial espionage. Now, as always, we begin the episode with the title over recap of the top of several scenes. This includes us getting close-ups of the body of the Xenomorph, which was present for the first 3 episodes. It was dead by episode 4, spoiler alert, so instead we got the doll's head on the beach, which, as many of you guys pointed out last week, might be a nod to Newt's doll. It's likely back here though, due to the fact it's alive for the flashbacks. You also see the shots of the Maginot with the head itself resembling the creature. Amongst these are cuts of the breakfast and the crew going down to sleep. One thing you might also notice is that as the sleeping bays close, that Petrovich's eyes are wide open. This was also mirrored in Morrow, with both waking up for the rest of the journey. Don't know if that was intentional, but either way, it's worth pointing out because yeah, that guy's the spy. We then get an empty breakfast table and then the ship's corridors. Originally, these were designed to play off the biomechanical design of H.R. Giger's work. This inspired the Xenomorph, and the tubes and pipes in the environment were meant to resemble the creature. So you would constantly feel like it was hiding in the ship's walls, which sometimes it was, to be fair. They also played with the colour and have the bright white corridors contrasted with the black ones. The film began in those lighter environments before switching to the darker ones as we got towards the end of the movie, which was always a very subtle touch that not many people notice. We then get text from Mother saying that the Maginot is 17 days away from Earth. The mission's been 65 years, which is vastly longer than the 10 months the Nostromo was in space for. Obviously, this has had to travel to numerous planets and pick up numerous different specimens, hence why the trip's a lot longer. During this time, the crew's wives have turned into old ladies, and their kids have grown up and even died. It's pretty much a mission that's cost them their entire life back home, and their lives in general, and I do wonder how much them shares were worth. Obviously, this crew had more of an idea of what the mission was, whereas the Nostromo had it as a secret objective, so they were probably paid a lot less. Now, throughout the entry, we learn the backstory behind Morrow. Like Ripley, he had a daughter who died while he was away. Ripley ended up drifting in space and ending up in the Romulus/Remus, which was kind of a retcon, but we do see her ship in the movie and then it gets blasted out at the end. It's then picked up decades later, and by that point, Amanda's died of old age. She looked happy though, but yeah, playing Alien Isolation, nightmare. She also lived a nightmare as well. Morrow's story, like Ripley's, is very, very tragic. We learn his daughter's called Estelle, and she died at the age of 19. All he gets is a pretty incompassionate note saying her possessions have been left in storage, which I can imagine him going to collect at some point. It's incredibly dark though, as we see this happen into year 8 of his 65-year mission. She also had similar aspirations to Joe, aiming to study at university and go on to try and forge her own future in this capitalistic hellscape. We see how she started looking at schools, but was only able to go to the ones that were Weyland-Yutani sanctioned. These schools have their own curriculums and have restrictions on what you can read and learn. She wants to go somewhere like Harvard, but they'd have to pay for it themselves. How nice of the companies to pay for college, with the one caveat, you can only learn approved things. But yeah, it very much shows how the corporations now run things. The letter also gives a clue to just how important that Morrow is to Weyland-Yutani. Her friend only got a partial scholarship, whereas she gets a full ride. So, how important is Morrow? Well, we learn that Ms. Yutani picked him up as a feral child off the streets of Ghana. He later talks about how he had a palsied arm and probably was getting by on his wits. But she cared for him, and thus he feels like he owes her forever. I do kind of wonder though if she took him in because he'd be able to be used as an experiment for their cyborg arm tests. That's me kind of filling in the blanks, but I don't know if Utani would have done it out of the kindness of her own heart. Because of this though, he's a full-on company man. All he cares about is getting the cargo back safely. Despite this though, he just gets a cold message saying his daughter's dead and we've kept her things for you. There's no personal message from Ms. Utani and not even a company pizza party. I do wonder if he will realise he's been used at some point because, yeah, you'd not send anyone you care about off to go and get a Xenomorph, especially if you're probably going to be dead before they get back. And he's not even captain. Despite that though, he's probably the only one in the crew who's not a complete moron. Now this is shown early on when we see Morrow woken up by his assistant. Two facehuggers have gone now and attacked the captain and Bronsky. We learn that Bronsky and Zaveri are sleeping together and their romance was hinted at in episode 1 when he was grabbing her at the breakfast table. The lad even recorded it, which is what we see later. He says she likes to be on top, which is what happens in the tape. And what the fuck is going on this ship? I think you need an HR team here. Like Morrow even has a look as well where he's like, what's going on with these idiots? Now, unlike Alien, there's two teams who rotate on a sleep schedule. Because of this, they have at least 3 pod bays. You might notice that a lot of them are empty, including 2 on the other rack. There's also one next to Morrow as well. As we learn, someone's been awake and sabotaging the ship. I did wonder if this was Petrovich, but judging off where he went to sleep in episode 1, it does seem unlikely. However, Tenga's the one who works this all out, and as we know, he likes watching people sleep. Where's the HR department? So I guess the message is, it's good to be a stalker. Unlike the slow wake-ups that we tend to get with these pods though, Morrow's quickly on his feet. We then see the captain and Bronsky on the tables. A neat detail is that the captain's dead, so he's on the trolley, whereas Bronsky's still alive, so he's on an actual operating table. This might have even been how they operated on them, as there's only one table attached to the scanner. It shows some sort of preferential treatment by Zaveri, which is a nice little detail. The room is also almost identical to the one on the Nostromo. It cracked me up how Zaveri says Morrow's in his underwear with sheer contempt.
You're in your underwear.
My guy's turning up to work in boxers and a t-shirt and you're bothered about that, but at least he's turning up to work and doing his job, love. He's the least of your problems right now, mate. Unless you want your boyfriend to have a baby. As we learn though, the captain died because of Rahim, who had tried to remove the facehugger. This is something they also did in Alien, but they didn't cut it completely. Here though, they severed the tail and it burned through and killed the captain. Later we hear how Zaveri also calls it a xenomorph, hinting that they know a lot about them. So why didn't they know they have acid for blood? That's like the big thing. Ultimately, Rahim's demise comes at trying to remove the ticks as well. The guy needs to just stop trying to pull stuff off because it never goes well. Either way, we see him smoking and he seems fairly casual about the whole thing. Kind of reminds me of something you'd see in the Napoleonic War or even in a pirate flick. They should have just done what the Romulus kids did though and freeze the facehugger directly. Now I have always wondered if killing the host like this also kills the creature inside. Technically the facehugger did its job and planted the embryo down the captain's throat. In Alien vs Predator, we ended with the Pred alien bursting forth even though the Predator was dead. We also had Sebastian get killed and then it bust out anyway before the Predator caught it. So I did wonder if one might spring from the captain, but they eject him before it gets to that point. Which, yeah, maybe they aren't completely incompetent. Chibuzo and Rahim though, they seem incredulous at Morrow asking about the fire and why the egg crates were open in the first place. As we see, they're pretty lax when it comes to security, and this even leads to Chibuzo's water bottle getting infected with the tadpoles. Zaveri doesn't think that the investigation's a pressing matter though, as her science officer has a facehugger, showing her priorities her boyfriend's safety. Now protocol dictates that anyone who comes into contact with an alien must be placed in cryosleep for the rest of the journey.
So you're saying freeze him with that thing humping his face for the rest of the ride?
This was also suggested by Parker in Alien.
How come you guys don't freeze him?
Morrow wants to lock the place down though and ensure nothing gets loose, which Zaveri reluctantly agrees with. Probably happy to do that as well, as Bronsky will be placed in cryo, so in her mind he maybe could be saved, which might not be the case, and yeah, we'll discuss it more in just a bit. If you were paying attention in episode 1 though, then yeah, you already know what happened with the character. We saw Bronsky's body during that entry, which told us ahead of time what would happen here. Actually kind of liking this episode of The Thing and its prequel, which is also called The Thing. In the first film, they went to the Norwegian camp and looked around at the aftermath of the destruction. Come the prequel, we actually saw how the entire film played out, even down to how an axe ended up in a door. If we go back to the first episode, you can actually see the empty pod where the mole went to sleep. We can also see that Bronski had the embryo burst out, and then the facehugger crawled off to go and die in another pod. This is what happened to Kane as well, and they later found the facehugger. They also talk about how long they've got left, which is roughly over 2 weeks. They make a joke about how they're not counting down the seconds, which is something Teng did in episode 1. Outside, we also get Morrow meeting with Malachite and his boss Shmuel. The latter is played by Michael Smiley, and I cannot unsee him as Tyres in Spaced. They're looking through a similar window to that of the Nostromo crew when they watch the surgery. Turns out that the fires fried their navigation systems, and they become like a missile that's pointed directly at Earth. The later damage turns them into an arrow, and they're just careening through space. But someone was responsible. It's a fantastic slow burn mystery that Morrow investigates over the course of the episode. We learn how it was Petrovich who set the fire as he decided to sell out to Cavalier. When the ship crashed, the Prodigy was like,
"We're all trying to find the guy who did this and give him a spanking."
It's obviously this guy, right?
"We're all trying to find the guy who did this." But this is what he wanted all along. The Nostromo also had major issues, as there was a fire when they landed on LB-426. Both also had someone working with the company. Weyland-Yutani may have even placed Ash on the ship, so they had someone who was loyal to them no matter what. Which you could see Morrow as, but the androids don't really change sides unless they're programmed to. What made me laugh though is how Malachite asks,
We're gonna be okay there, right, boss?
He's wildly naive, and he's clearly being kept in the dark for most of his life. He even had to be told about who runs the world in episode 1. Shmuel also has spitting tobacco, which kind of plays into how the whole crew smoked during the original. It was the 70s, mate. Morrow also smokes a cigar later on, and we saw Apone do this in Alien and a soldier do it in episode 3. The fact he's chewing tobacco though, that might be for a practical reason. An engineer might end up near gas, so it's dangerous to have a lit flame hanging out your mouth. But these guys, I think they're stupid enough to do it. At the lab, we see how useless Chlamydia is, and he even grabs a stool as weapon. Having just watched the latest episode of Peacemaker, it also killed me how Morrow kept calling him Chlamydia. Like big tits. The scientist, though, is calm as all the samples are still locked up. It's all green, so they're all safe. Which I wonder if this will come around again. Yeah, obviously that returns later on and tells us the eye guy's gonna escape. We then see the samples in their boxes, but we haven't seen all of them in action yet. There was that weird bug thing that Boy looked at in the lab, and lots of insect-like creatures in the containers. The plant still hasn't attacked either, and there were some spindly things that haven't broken out yet. We also see the facehuggers in a tube ready to be experimented on. This is very similar to the lab in Aliens, where Bishop reads up on the creatures. We then spin around and see the ship from the outside, which further exemplifies how similar it is to the Xenomorph. It's got the semicircle at the top like the alien head, and the antenna at the bottom that's like their inner mouth. Now you might notice it's silent as we zoom in on the bridge. The explosion later also has no sound because, like they say, in space, no one can hear you scream. The episode itself is actually titled In Space, No One, which of course plays into the slogan of the franchise. Here we then cut to the bridge and see the window that was in Alien. Morrow is adamant that this is not a mere accident, but argues it's either incompetence or sabotage. Probably a bit of both though, mate. Have you met the crew? Mother and the engineers carry out rigorous stress tests and simulations, so this seems like a targeted attack. However, Zaveri's now the acting captain, and she's adamant nothing's wrong. The attention to detail on set is just mind-blowing though. The red torch things are there just like the first film. The pipes are there as well that separate the two seats. Even the computer table behind the seats, that's like something that was present in the movie. I'm pretty sure this is also where they show the taser. They recreated it for Alien Isolation, and you got to walk around this area in the intro of the game. During this, we also see the symbols above the doorways. These are known as semiotic standard, and they denote where the corridors on the ship lead to. So, for example, the one behind Zaveri says, pressurized area that leads to a pressure suit locker, then medical before going to a non-pressurized area. Morrow then brings up how she was banging Bronski, which Morrow says goes against company policy. She says it's because you get lonely out here, and kind of plays into something that Scott wanted originally. Now in Alien, he was going to imply that all the crew were sleeping together. Ripley and Dallas were also going to have something at the film confirmed, but they ended up cutting this. However, we've kind of gone back to that. This is also something that he played up in Prometheus when he had Wayland's daughter sleeping with Idris Elba. Forgot the names, I'm blanking on the names and I'm ad-libbing right now. Also, I love how Morrow says he knows because he's the security officer and he knows everything. But didn't you just learn about that when you were woken up by chlamydia? This is clearly a move to replace her as the acting commander though, and probably why he doesn't save her in the end. Also, you know, there was of course only room for one in the safe room. Morrow then reminds her that the instructions to bring the cargo back are crystal clear, whether the crew survives or not. Zaveri wants to go and talk to Mother, and both end up there at different points in the episode. Morrow shuts this idea down though, and he also locks her out the room at the end, which leads to her death. So it's a nice bit of foreshadowing. We get another clue as to just how powerful he is, as he says his orders are from Yutani herself. He is to get the cargo back to Earth, crew expendable. Even the cat. We then cut to the sleep pods as Rahim says,
"Not a victory for the enemy of reason."
Teng asks what this means, and his cadence really reminds me of The Matrix. In that franchise, Agent Smith infects a human and spreads his consciousness to Bane. This leaves the victim, Bane, speaking just like Agent Smith. That has the undertones of parasites and AI infecting humans, so I did wonder if this was done on purpose or not. Teng, just doing his best Agent Smith impression throughout the episode. Rahim then opines that the smart people bringing the parasites shows how stupid that said smart people can be. And yeah, lots of idiots on the ship, mate. Pot calling the kettle black. I do think though that you could see what they're doing as being purely out of greed. Humanity is multiplanetary, tech is super advanced, and people can live their #best lives. However, with the 5 being the 5, there's constant competition between the corporations. They all need to use people to be the best of the best of the best, sir, but this model revolves around exploitation. Despite all these advances, the corporations want to engage in reckless scientific experiments and are fighting a cold war between themselves. I did even wonder if it's a play on the 5 families of New York. They all had uneasy alliances and would screw over the other just to attain more power. If Wayland have something like the Xenomorph, then yeah, they can basically rule the galaxy. However, human error is always going to screw stuff up. Teng is creepy as hell though, and he stares at the girl he's obsessed with while holding out his hand. Teng is desperate for that pootie tang, and weirdly, this is where we see her with a wound at during episode 1. So I did wonder back then if this was connected to that, but obviously not. He seems to think he can do whatever he wants now though, as the captain is dead.
Captain's dead.
He exists though to basically be a red herring. We then pan down to the woman, but ultimately this doesn't go anywhere, which I do wonder if there was something that they ended up cutting out, because yeah, I was kind of hooked by this whole weird thing, but yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. Rahim then says how Bronsky wasn't a good man, which is a bit weird. We never got him expanded upon, other than a video home saying he met a girl. I think in this world, you just kind of hate everyone, as everyone's selfish and out for their own ends, which in turn makes you selfish as well. Going to the samples, we then see the giant plant thing that seems to be interested in Morrow. This is pointing out its pistil towards him, which is the female reproductive part of a plant. We saw it do the same thing to Toodles in episode 2, and I'm quite excited to see when it finally gets someone. When's it gonna happen? Morrow then goes to open the case in Egg and then examines the acid burns. Something similar also happened on the Nostromo, and the crew raced through the ship to see if it would burn through the hull. That was an accident though, whereas here it's being used to damage key parts of the ship. He looks down the hole, which is just like what they did in Aliens and also Alien Romulus. It gave them a better look through the compound and let you imagine the carnage that went down there. The cigar also makes a very satisfying fall right through to the bottom of the ship. We then get to see just what happened as Morrow returns to the security room. It carries on that theme of voyeurism, which has been seen in lots of different characters. Wendy watched her brother, and then Boy watched Wendy watching her brother on the monitor, and we also had Kirsch watching slightly. Shoutouts to our t-shirt designer Sheridan for also pointing out there's actually a dark version of Peter Pan, which was written by M.A. Kirsch. Though the spelling's different, you know, all the Peter Pan connections, I did think it might be something worth pointing out. Sheridan also does lots of great designs, mate, and if you want to pick them up, then check out our merch store below. We've just launched this one inspired by the series, which comes in single and double-sided prints. You'll look fantastic in there, and along with that we have our Building Better Worlds one and also our Vitruvian Man inspired one. There's also lots of Predator ones too, all the ones behind me, and if you buy 3, you get 20% off. Shabow! Now as Morrow scrubs through the footage before the fire hits, you can actually see the egg containers being opened up already. Thus, it's a trap! The captain and Bronsky then rush in to put out the fire. However, the eggs are hatched and ready to go, so they quickly become incubators. 2 are unleashed, with them both being incredibly strong. Though the captain manages to hold one for a bit, we did see in Alien how they crack through Kane's spacesuit. It also feels like it builds off some of the stuff from the facehugger scene in Alien vs Predator, which is also a banger scene and breakdown on the channel now. As the captain goes to help Bronsky, we can also see a door that's exactly the same as the one on the Nostromo. There we also had the dripping water and the same aesthetic that we do here. As the captain gets swarmed, you can also see the thing that goes down his throat, just like what your mum likes. In Alien Romulus, we saw poor old Navarro get facehugged with the aliens launching at her in the egg room, just like they do here. When it was pulled off her, we could see that tentacle coming out too. We then see Petrovich mess with the electronics and open up the egg case. I did like how the character was really difficult to make out though, and you couldn't tell if it was either a man or a woman. Those unisex overalls and just the thick black hair, yeah, I was constantly looking around trying to guess who it was. Not you, Teng. Morrow has no clue who it is either, and he starts an investigation. Gareth Keenan investigates. Sorry, that's a ridiculously niche reference there, but moving on. Zaveri's distraught at her bonk buddy being frozen with a facehugger on him though, and she has him dirt with a label saying Utah. Presumably, this is Earth from where Bronsky's from. Placing soil on someone's grave that's from their hometown is a pretty common practice, and I do actually think this tradition would carry across the space as well. It makes sense that a Weyland-Yutani employee would be from Utah, as the company controls North and South America as well as Mars and Saturn. Also, huge shout outs to our editor Steesh for pointing out the soil is reddish, and the area where it's placed on his chest, in regards to the camera anyway, that could be foreshadowing the chestburster. The mock funerals then interrupted with flashes of her shagging him, which is a nice way to remember him. Intercut with this, we then see Morrow watching the tape of them in the cargo bay. As this is against company protocol, they had to do it out of sight, but they've still laid down a mattress and pillow like some sort of home away from home. Reminds me of a video I watched, mate. It had an alien in it and face hugging in that. Doing it near the samples is very, very creepy though. Noah Hawley actually discussed how the show's about how a lot of different things replicate. The facehuggers do it in their own way, and we also see the tadpoles later on. So this idea of sex would probably be weird for the creatures watching it, but it definitely ties in the show's themes. H.R. Giger's designs were very, very sexual, and the themes of Alien fit in with ideas of forced birth and also sexual assault. She then says to him, "Almost home, baby," but her memories are infected with the facehugger. Not the only thing getting a deep... She seems almost insecure when she's in charge though, and I wonder if her wanting to be on top is her trying to control him during their lovemaking. And I just want to segue here as well and say that was our editor Matt who pointed out that one, mate. You can take credit for that one. The music is fantastic here though, as we see the facehugger's tail tighten around Bronsky. I think this scene is really important though, as it highlights she's accepted his death. The guy is still alive, but she knows things won't work out. So it empowers her to then go to Mother. We then cut to Malachite, who's very annoyed because he was told they'd be collecting rocks. He signed up for a biological survey, but he's then told if it was for rocks, it would be a geological one. I wonder if he even thinks his name is a rock as opposed to a mineral. He's thick. They're all incompetent. You should be an alien covenant. You'd fit in great there. The pair crack me up though, as he asks how he knows all this, and Shmuel basically just wants a bit of his pie. Malachite has a meat pie, and this reminds me of a Cornish pasty. They were originally used for workers away from home and popularized by the miners, making them a working class staple. Miners could eat them without cutlery, and they provided a full meal. They actually invented pasties so you could hold the crust and then eat the filling without getting dirt on the bit you were munching on. So yeah, kind of ties into that. And though this looks nothing like a Cornish pasty, it still shows they're on this working class diet. Like maybe he got it from Greg's on the ship or something. Malachite's shares are then threatened when he asks if someone damaged the ship on purpose. He does lose a 16th of them later on, and the amount of shares was a point of contention at the start of Alien. They basically blackmail them into not paying them at all if they act disobedient, and thus in the end they decide not to speak up, which is also a thing that kind of pushes Petrovich to side with Boy. He intimidates his colleague as he puts his blade to his neck, even suggesting it could be him, which shows just how ruthless he is when it comes to the mission. Guy even manipulates slightly and has no problem killing kids, or robot kids anyway. He then hands him a gun. You can see how nervous and scared that the lad is as the gun shakes like crazy when he holds it. He's clearly at his depth, likely not even expecting to need one. We then see him with the taser gun, which is what he used to save Joe in episode 2. The reason for this is later expanded upon, as Zaveri says they can't kill the Xenomorph as its blood will eat through the hull.
They bleed acid.
Which is the same thing that Dallas said.
Don't say anything like that except, molecular acid.
Must be using it for blood.
By using the taser, they can capture, not kill. Now, not only can he stop it from being a threat, but he can also deliver it to his boss unharmed. It's something the Nostromo did as well, as Brett came up with a cattle prod device to help stop the one on their ship. We also saw a similar weapon in Alien Isolation. Now, about the room, we can see the semiotic standards above the door. The first means directions up, down, left, right, meaning that the corridor gives full access to the ship. It's also pressurized with artificial gravity and leads to a bulkhead door. Over Chlamydia's shoulder, we can also see the spacesuits. These appeared in the original movie and they're what we saw down the corridor at the beginning. He also wore these suits several times in Alien Isolation and would often approach these stands and then get dressed in them. Zaveri then heads to Mother and loads up the system just like Dallas did in the first film. Even the sounds are identical. Beep beep. Entering into the chamber, the seat's the same, complete with the spin. Zaveri is officially taking command due to the captain being dead. I love the way they shoot this moment as we have her in focus along with her screen. So it just allows the two to have a conversation. Her new role's accepted and she's immediately asked about the cargo. Mother doesn't care about the captain's death. The line must only go up. The line must go up. We see that the eggs are also called ovomorphs. Ovo is based on ovarian and it's a technical term from the canon. She requests to destroy the cargo so the threat doesn't increase. However, she's once more reminded that that's a top priority, not their safety. I love how he keeps saying acknowledge and then threatens her with giving control to Morrow. He's obviously loyal to the company, so if she won't do it, he definitely will. With a deep breath, she realizes she's royally fucked here and they would rather she die than lose the Xenomorph. At first, I found the lights reflected in the screen made the text a bit difficult to read, and normally, it's presented in solid black and green, but they may have done this for a reason. This could show she's not getting the full picture. Giving control over Morrow will also cost her as well, so in the end, she reluctantly agrees. I think the fact that it's her boyfriend though, she held a funeral and she's now asking to kill the creature, which as we know would kill him, yet that shows she's ready to make the tough choice. She's doing that for humanity, whereas Morrow's just doing things for the company. And we understand why when we learn about his daughter's death. Cutting to him, we hear a version of "We'll Meet Again," which was originally sung by Vera Lynn before I improved on it. Now, if you recognize that opening and this version, then you are a man of culture. This is the cover by the ink spots that was used in the Fallout TV series. MT covered that for the channel, and we will of course be back for season 2. The opening few notes were also included on their song, "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire." Of course, this is the song from Fallout 3. We'll Meet Again became synonymous with World War II due to the lyrics and even had a resurgence during the COVID lockdowns. It's about seeing someone you've not seen for a long time and basically a song about hope. Due to its usage in the war, it was something that spurred soldiers on when they were hoping for happier days when they'd be reunited. However, since then, it's also taken on the meaning of seeing someone in the afterlife. Morrow is reminiscing over his daughter's cards and letters, which the song nicely fits with. The first letter we see is Estelle telling him she had a nightmare and she says how she dreamt that he flew by the moon. This is something he'll actually do as well, as that's what the ship passes by right before it crashes. She's even drawn him a picture which looks like a child's dinosaur, and a reach could be that it's a xenomorph. Meanwhile, Rahim prepares the captain for a space burial. He says, "My bad, should have been me, mate."
Not yet. No offense.
Which did crack me up a bit. He will ironically die in this room while also trying to remove an alien, and yeah, you were right, Not just yet, but very, very soon. Kane was also prepared for burial in space and shut out the airlock, much like the captain here. We then see Morrow recall walking with his daughter on a beach. It continues the Ripley parallels as she lived in a town on the coast of El Salvador, which is a deep cut reference. The beach also reminds me heavily of Prodigy's Neverland. I did actually think at some point, they might reveal they tried to keep her alive by making a deal with Boy. Yutani obviously didn't protect her though, and yeah, with immortality being such a big theme in the show, I do wonder how his daughter's death will play into it. Also, love how the fire is shot in the foreground, and this is what Estelle died from, so it will forever tarnish this memory. Now, in discovering the truth about Petrovich, it's possible it could have inspired his plan with Slightly. Having someone on the inside who'll work for you and can bring everything crashing down, that's what Boy did here, so this may have inspired why he's doing that with Boy. As he closes up the memory box, we can also see a magazine with what looks like a Casio digital watch on the cover. This might be a reference to Ripley's dual-face Casio and Alien, or it might just be a reach. After this though, he goes to sleep and all is calm until a massive explosion rocks the ship. It wakes him up and you can see he's been sleeping with a gun on his chest, showing how paranoid he is. They then have a meeting on the bridge, but Teng's just carrying on as per usual. Seems like a bit of a psycho, that lad. The costumes for the characters are also really good though, with Teng and Morrow looking like they have on car hat workwear, which shows the working class nature of the crew. At this point we learn the fuel's almost empty, meaning they can't avoid Earth at all. You don't really seem bothered about it though, Teng mate, to be honest. Things then go from bad to worse as the Xeno's blown right out of Bronsky. Just like he blew the back out of We know that Xenos can survive harsh environments like the cold vacuums of space, and the one Ripley ejected into space was then picked up by the company in Alien Romulus. There were also spin-offs where the Queen kept going on after aliens as it landed on a planet. So yeah, freezing it wasn't ever going to hold it. It seems here though that they know far, far more than Nostromo, and it makes sense why future missions wouldn't be this ambitious. Raheem, like the idiot he is though, says,
So what? We find some nets? How big can it get?
but Zaveri and Morrow arm up. However, this is actually a callback to the first movie. There we saw Parker have a net ready to trap the Xeno on the Nostromo. As mentioned, they're getting non-lethal weapons, and I guess if it bleeds, you can stun it.
You son of a bitch.
We then cut to Chibuzo, who's eating, drinking, and basically leaving every container open that she can. Whether it's the tank with the ticks or her water, she's leaving it open. And I'm never eating a sandwich or drinking water again. And just a piece of advice, mate, yeah? Do not drink and eat around alien parasites. Like, in general, do not have your lunch there. She then drops a rat in, which is similar to what she did in episode 1. She thinks they won't eat dead animals, but this is quickly proven false, showing just how much of a limited understanding that they have. We also see the eye watching her, and I love how all these different eyes kind of stick together and create a full image. Kind of like how, we have two eyes, but our brain joins them together into one image. I'm the science officer of heavy spoilers. The ticks also exhibit intelligence, and one breaks its way out the lid. Ocelus also escapes later as well, and the pair reminded me a lot of an octopus, which octopus might even be a playoff, even though it of course also means eye. But yeah, if you've ever seen one of those videos where the octopus is trapped in a jar, you'll know they can watch what way the lid's screwed on and then reverse that notion and break themselves out. They are masters of escape, and the creatures here are also highly intelligent. My guy the eye even distracts Chibuzo while the tick sprays its seeds in the water. It then goes and hides in the sandwich, and she gets a narrow escape from becoming lunch herself. However, as she's fitting in the eye, she's distracted by Raheem pointing it out.
For fuck's sake!
Yeah, so the latch doesn't close there properly, and you might notice throughout the scene, the light's still red. But she's so focused on how incompetent that she's being, she's even more incompetent. Anyway, she heads out with a flask, and the eye breaks free. We see it using its tentacles like a slingshot, which is also something it did to Nibs in episode 2. She's constantly almost infected until poor Malachite gets it, but it reminded me a lot of something like Final Destination. There we get people having gruesome deaths, but it's like lots of misdirects and things I think are gonna happen. Anyway, we then get to them meeting at the lunch table. Above the entrance, we can once more see the symbols for ladder, which you can spot behind them, pressure suit locker, and lastly the astronic system. They also walk past a booth which has a tiny little nodding bird in it. These featured at the start of Alien and also appeared in Alien Romulus. Teng's been taking cigarettes and overstepping boundaries, and Chibuzo says This is why she eats in the lab, which, yeah, good work, mate. The Xeno is now out there though, and to make matters worse, they're flying on fumes. They also have to deal with the Saboteur, so no one is allowed to leave their quarters, and Malachite loses his shares for wanting to eat. Malachite also asks,
What's the Saboteur? Is that like a French? Shut up.
and he's of course on a ship named after a Frenchman. Maginot created what was supposed to be an impenetrable line of defense that would let the country withstand invasion. However, this had its flaws and ultimately turned out to be useless. These fortifications were bypassed because the Germans went through a forest which had been deemed impassable by the French. Therefore, it wasn't really fortified. The Germans also pushed through the Netherlands and Belgium, so the term Maginot and not Maginot, that's taken on the meaning of something though impenetrable that's broken through with ease, which you can definitely apply to this ship. Everyone's a fucking idiot. I love how we see the chili bottle as well, which he uses on his food. We then slowly zoom in on the water, and you kind of wonder who's gonna drink from it first. He then ends up taking the sip, and I love the tension throughout this scene. Malachite was also coughing, which is again very similar to Kane. Both were eating what looked like noodles, and both were coughing up a lung at the table. Granted, Kane was about to have something burst out his chest, and Malachite is just, he's a pussy. He orders the lemon and herb at Nando's. And look, if you order that, mate, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I just think you're a piece of shit, and I hate you.
If you don't chew Big Red, then you.
What it does, though, is continue the trend of people dying after a meal, as Bronski was also infected after eating. Morrow then restricts the guns, so everyone's pretty screwed when it comes to self-defense. Morrow also shows how he's not listening to Zaveri, as he's now delegating shares out to whoever gets him info. He's completely distrustful, whereas Zaveri's far too trusting.
Did you sabotage my ship?
What? No.
Good.
Like clearly not vetting her staff. Meanwhile, Morrow checks the interviews. I love how Raheem says they're smelling recycled farts, which is something that people often say about airplanes. Everyone has an alibi though. You also wonder why ultimately people would work 65 years just to screw it up in the last 2 weeks. I did wonder if 65 was chosen because it's normally an age of retirement, so these people have basically done a life on the job. Ultimately though, it again boils down to greed. I do feel like even without the mole, they would have still screwed things up. There's a great bit where water also drips from the ceiling. Eventually, this is the saliva of the Xenomorph, and it neatly sets it up. The puppet actually had lines plumbed into it, so it could drip saliva on demand non-stop. Fun fact, they also called the puppet Steve behind the scenes, which is something fans of Alien Isolation called the Xeno in that game. Raheem just complains and complains and complains though, and Morrow just stares at him until he cracks. Ultimately, Raheem just wants to go home though, and therefore wouldn't screw up the job. We then cut to everyone's favourite engineers. Not the ones in Prometheus. Down in the engine room, we see a giant spotlight, which was also an alien. We had a similar light shining on Lambert, which is when the Xenomorph stepped in and we got its shadow hit the wall, which was an awesome scene. What I love about this episode though, is that it doesn't really do the member berries thing that they did in episode 1. Instead, it uses the past to play with your expectations. So we think Malachite might get grabbed because, yeah, we've seen a similar scene before. They even have a chain dangling down just like the creature's tail, and the shadows are used in a similar way. This is a fake out though, but I love how they made the scene even more tense by having Shmuel's arm in the wall. We think something might grab him, but yeah, goes in a totally different direction. They talk about how you forfeit your life for a tiny share and then end up asking for another job, if you even survive. Malachite then throws up and he vomits blood, almost like the backburster scene. I love how Shmuel is just saying, you better not throw up, because yeah, he's kind of sick of his shit at this point. At the lab, we also hear that the eyes got out as well. Great work, guys.
You done fucked it up!
They mention how gamma radiation's been used, and this is a signature that they've used before to track the creatures. Gamma radiation is of course also tied to the Hulk, so they might be like, we've made them bigger than they ever needed to be. Just, I'm reaching there, but yeah, I just thought that. Cross my mind, look, don't shoot me. Now in the first movie, Ash made a tracking device that noted changes in the air density. You could see that on a little screen, but it proved futile for Dallas. It was a precursor to the one used in Aliens though, and yeah, since then, motion trackers have become a big thing in the series. This is where things really start to ramp up though, and everything goes to hell. Zaveri also pulls out her stun gun. Obviously, they have to keep the creatures alive, but Morrow gets a pulse rifle, and I wonder if he gave her this so she couldn't use it against him. Cutting to Tang getting interrogated, we see he's the #1 suspect. Guy has serial killer vibes written all over him, and Morrow knows he's been going to that girl's capsule and still doing his filth, which is what he calls it. He asks how he bypasses the keypads because sometimes he'd have to wake up in order to do this. So potentially he knows someone can do this because he's been waking up as well. Just so creepy, and yeah, you kind of wonder, like, if you had a guy on board like this, how do you even handle it? Like when he sits down in episode 1 next to that girl, she gets up and leaves. But there's nowhere to really go, and you can either eject him into space, kill him, or simply just learn to live with him. Now if you watched our breakdown of episode 1, you'll know we also pointed out that there was a moment in which the Xeno looked down on Teng. That's the full scene we get here, and while Morrow gets the final file needed, Teng gets attacked. It drips down on him, and finally gets a reaction out the guy they call Robot. Felt a lot like Reese getting acid dripped on his leg during Resurrection, and there is a breakdown on that movie on the channel now. Enjoy yourself. Anyway, Morrow then looks through the log and learns all their messages. This included things like Malachite not knowing what an apprentice was, and just constantly watching this episode, like, I know they're hamming it up and making it a bit of a joke, but what a fucking moron. Anyway, dies soon, RIP. If you watched our Alien Covenant video as well, you might remember that we brought up the theory on why the crew was so stupid. The corporation would need people they could easily control, so they handpicked dumb people for these missions. If you're not intelligent, then you're less likely to ask questions, and yeah, be more easy to direct. Which might not be true, but yeah, that was going through my head quite a lot in this episode. With the mission being 65 years as well, you know, you wouldn't exactly get the cream of the crop applying. Only those who are desperate, like a former drug addict or a younger, less experienced person. It's here that we then get 70s adult movie star Petrovich talking with Boy. I love the twist and how he was basically trying to get people everywhere to find out what Yutani was up to. Petrovich asks for a new body, as he'd never be able to afford that on his own. We know that it doesn't really work on adults though, and Boy says,
We can do that. Almost.
Around this time, he'd had Wendy and the Lost Boys for quite a while, so he knows fine well that it's possible. However, that almost is kind of like we can almost do it with adults, and it's sort of a Faustian deal that I feel, yeah, he's kind of laying the groundwork there for be like, look, we said we could almost do it, not definitely could. I also feel like he doubts Petrovich will survive the crash.
What if I don't survive the crash?
All Boy says is, well, that will suck for you. Again, it's just exploitation and the rich not really caring for the poor. Which is what got Petrovich to turn sides in the first place. If we go back to that conversation in episode 1, Petrovich was also the one who brought up Boy when they mentioned the 5.
Started by a kid maybe 10 years ago.
He was the one who knew who he was because obviously he'd been talking to him. Raheem also told him it was a bad idea to eat a heavy meal before cryo sleep, but as we know, he hasn't been sleeping. The captain also said that the comms were down, and he said,
I can have a look.
Clearly wanting to make sure it wasn't fixed. Malachite also left the scene by grabbing the chili sauce bottle, which was, yeah, just something I noticed on a rewatch. It's at this point that Morrow comes across his empty bed, and I did wonder who was watching him. At this point, it could be the Xenomorph or even Petrovich. In the first film, there was 2 enemies, you know, in the Xenomorph and Ash, and I like how they changed it and have the Xenomorph and a person, and then all the other specimens. It also explains why Morrow was so invested in finding out who Boy was after the crash. I do wonder how Petrovich was recruited in the first place, as Prodigy wasn't a thing when the Maginot left Earth. But they might end up filling that in, or just completely gloss over it. Look, we kind of know what went on. As Morrow heads off to confront him though, you can see the pods on the right of the screen. Now, I might be reaching, but they actually look a little bit like a splayed out facehugger. In space, no one can hear you reach! We then see Malachite being scanned. The table in the scanner was also used on Kane, and it gets them an internal look at what's going on in his body. It also gives us a similar display to what we got with Kane when they investigated the tube down his throat. This is a scene that we saw at the crash site, and now we theorize it could have been the exact same facehugger throat scan that Kane had. But as we learn, it's checking Malachite's GI tract for ticks. So the theory was wrong, and we were reaching, surprisingly. Raheem also mentioned during the interrogation that he used to be a drug addict. So I do wonder if he'd managed to get them on board, and was possibly even using them during this episode. Even things like morphine can be addictive, and there's several stories of surgery deaths due to doctors being on it. I don't know, mate, I'm trying to explain why everyone's an idiot for like 50 minutes now. Now, I did research whether ticks have ever been known to emit gas, but for now, this is purely science fiction. However, upon removal, ticks often secrete fluid, which can stop them from being pulled off. Either way, all 3 die, and they were of course discovered in the lab during the premiere episodes. At that time I thought Malachite had a chest burster, but yeah, again, now we know. You might also have noticed Raheem was hanging up in the tubes, so at some point, yeah, the crash kind of moved all the bodies about. Morrow then urges them to seal the room, and we see blasts of air just like Alien Resurrection. There we saw the scientists keep the xenomorphs in check by hitting them with something similar. The clap then comes to say Teng's being grabbed, and Morrow realizes the Xeno's been using the vents, which is how it got about in the first film. Morrow and Chlamydia then head through the corridors, and we then get a shootout. Petrovich takes out Chlamydia like antibiotics, and he then dies in the lab. Morrow then kills Petrovich by stabbing him through the back, which is something that the Xenomorphs also do to their prey. Something that the Queen did to Bishop as well, and it's a nice play on the series' iconography. We see just how strong Morrow's bionic arm is as well. The fact he can hold the guy up like this one-handed highlights his strength, and he's someone who can probably go toe-to-toe with the kids. Due to Morrow being unaware the lab was locked for a reason, the eye then escapes. The ticks also crawl across the table, and this is where they feed on the soldiers that Morrow ties up. If you go back to episode 1, around the 1 minute 50 mark, you'll also see that Clap's found suck dry, which I'll not make a joke about because rest in peace my boy Chlamydia. Meanwhile, Zaveri's focused on the important stuff, like making sure she pours dirt outside the room. Xenomorph then descends, and they give us a guy in a suit rather than a CGI creation, which I actually prefer. Like, it has those human elements of it, but also the twisted design of Giga. So I think it works really well, and it kinda sniffs the air around her. The creatures have skulls inside their dome, but they don't technically have eyes. Instead, they rely on stimuli around them, which in turn creates a picture in their head. The Xeno smelling her is also similar to what the one did to Ripley during Alien 3. It trips her up, which is what the creature did to Joe in episode 2, and a tail also went up Lambert's pant leg just before the monster killed her. She then begins to run, and this is where we join the chaser in episode 1. We saw things from the Xenomorph's point of view and watched as Zaveri ran down the corridor. It was really similar to some of the shots from the original trailer, which were played out. They actually end up using some of those notes in the scene as well, but they're way more low-key due to Zaveri hiding out. She then attempts to hide, but it gets closer and closer, and ultimately she makes a dash for the ladder. If you've played Alien Isolation, then you might know there's a bit where you can also troll the alien. Just basically climb up and down the ladder, and it can't get you, mate. Just keep going up and down, love. Speaking of that game, she then gets out an ion torch, which you can also use to burn doors open with. She sees Shmuel, but it's at this point we learn what happened to the eye. Very similar to some of the stuff he got in the thing, and yeah, never thought we'd get Michael Smiley fighting against the Xenomorph, but here we are. Just before that though, we get one of the best shots in the entire series. Shmuel grabs Zaveri, and we then pull out from the glass to see the Xeno climb up on the ceiling. We then pan down, and Morrow climbs out the vent. Just a seamless one shot that I'm guessing took lots of work due to gravity. Gravity always messes stuff up, mate, but the fact it crawls on the ceiling, which is probably on the floor in real life, and then you get him coming up outright, fantastic work. Morrow then goes in, and the eye seems to call out to the creature. I think its entire MO is to just jump from body to body, and it knows if the Xeno comes, it has a chance of doing this. Morrow then blasts it with a stun gun, but it doesn't really seem to affect it. My guess is, due to it being a separate entity, it's unharmed by it and still can control the nerves in the body. Same way like, you know, if you get shot in a game, it just pushes you back, but you're in control so you don't actually get harmed. Just the person you're controlling, does that make sense? The fight then happens with Shmuel biting into the creature. I did wonder if the acid blood would affect it, but all it wants to do is take control. The Xeno then spears him through the back, and the eye attempts to latch itself on. The hide's too thick to break through though, but it ends up buying Zaveri and Morrow time. Well, time for Morrow anyway. As we know, the eye goes after the cat, and we've already seen what happens in this scene. Zaveri is brutally killed, while Morrow reports that the crew's dead. What we learn though is what song Morrow was humming. This is We'll Meet Again, and he thinks of his daughter. This riffed off Ripley singing You Are My Lucky Star, and both use this as a way to keep calm. However, him singing it here and the lyrics, that could be him accepting his death. He's thinking about how he's going to meet his daughter and likely doesn't think he'll survive the crash. But he does, and we then cut to the present at a Weyland-Yutani-owned city, which I believe is New York City. The skyscrapers dominate the landscape, and there's banners up just like what we had with Boy. Treated like a head of state, we see this reflected in her gods. They appear like the Praetorian ones of old, which were the basis for the ones in Return of the Jedi. As you can guess, their name comes from the fact that they used to guard over emperors. The name actually originates from ancient Rome, where they would protect the Caesars. So it just shows how important that she is. She says that Cavaliers agreed to arbitration, but Morrow wants to take his soldiers. It's kind of heading in a different direction, as I thought he'd sneak aboard the island through using slightly. However, this hints they're going with all-out war. The cyberpunk-esque world of a Japanese company ruling over America is seen here just like Blade Runner. In the 80s, especially the bubble era, Japan was seen as possibly the next superpower. They were dominating technology, and those ideas are ever present in everything cyberpunk. The Weyland-Yutani skyscraper just dwarfs the city, massive, and it's reminiscent of the Araska Tower in Cyberpunk 2077. He then looks over this great and vast empire, and we hear Cherub Rock by the Smashing Pumpkins.
Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins.
Homer Simpson, smiling politely.
The song appeared on their best album, Siamese Dream. You said I was wrong for saying Black Album was the best Metallica record, but...
Why you boring me? I'm right.
Cherub Rock is a scathing takedown of the indie scene at the time, as well as corporations backing punk bands and basically manufacturing everything, and basically the entire music industry being fake. The lyrics are, who wants honey? As long as there's some money, who wants that honey? You know, it hints at selling out, which is something that Morrow is also doing. By ensuring that the cargo was delivered, he killed everyone on board. Petrovich also sold out as well, and yeah, unfortunately, the people who actually cared about the people, they all ended up dead. The Smashing Pumpkins were of course also called sellouts as well when they signed with Virgin Records and released Siamese Dream, so again, it's a clever needle drop from Noah Hawley. Either way, that closes out the episode, and huge thank you for joining me on this doomed journey. I had a blast as a crew member of the Maginot, and I love how this worked as its own sort of standalone short film. It constantly kept me guessing, and though I would have liked, maybe a bit more filled in, overall this was my favourite entry in the series. I love when a show can take someone you think's a villain and then paint them out in a brand new light. And that's exactly what we got here. It had its horror, humour, style and atmosphere, and they're all elements that made me fall in love with Alien in the first place. So yeah, as a big Alien fan, it was great in a sort of what-if tale and a very solid entry amongst the series. Please drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed us breaking it down, and also drop a comment with all your thoughts below. If you want to follow us on Instagram as well, then make sure you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Did you know that members of the channel also get early access to videos? If you click the join button, you'll get at least one breakdown a week before everyone else, and at the moment we've got Alien vs Predator for you guys. It's an hour long, it might sound boring, but if you like Alien vs Predator and talking about crap movies, then yeah, go check it out. Costs just 99 cents a month, and yeah, though hopefully it's not a lot to you, it means a lot to us. Anyway, if you want something else to watch, we've got a breakdown on screen right now. With that out of the way, huge thank you for sticking through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.